You can hold me in contempt all you want, but you are a corrupt joke, Your Honor, and everyone here knows.
A police officer walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom wearing his uniform like armour. But what happened next proved that no badge could shield someone from accountability. This is the story of Officer Derek Moss, a man with 18 years on the force who was about to learn that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. I am Frederick, and I've spent years studying courtroom cases where authority meets consequence. Some stories reveal uncomfortable truths about power and prejudice, and this one carries lessons we can't afford to ignore. If you believe accountability should reach everyone, no matter what uniform they wear, go ahead and hit that like button. It was a Thursday morning in Providence Municipal Court. Judge Caprio prepared for what appeared to be a routine misconduct hearing when his bailiff approached with a quiet warning. The defendant was a police officer and he'd already been argumentative with court staff. The case file told a troubling story. Officer Derek Moss, age 43, 18 years on the force, facing charges that included excessive force, misconduct during arrest, and falsifying a police report. The notes mentioned multiple prior complaints and a pattern that had finally reached the judge's courtroom. Officer Moss entered wearing his full uniform. His badge caught the light as he walked down the centre aisle with visible confidence. Dark aviator sunglasses remained on his face despite being indoors. His arms crossed over his chest as he surveyed the room with what looked like disdain. He checked his watch repeatedly, his body language making it clear he considered this proceeding a waste of time. When a court clerk asked him to sign in, he scoffed loud enough for people to hear. The gallery noticed immediately. This wasn't a man who came prepared to show humility. Judge Caprio began with professional courtesy, asking Officer Moss to approach the bench and remove his sunglasses. They were there to address serious allegations regarding his conduct during an arrest. Moss removed the sunglasses slowly, as if doing the judge a favour. His voice carried across the courtroom when he said this was ridiculous, that he shouldn't even be there. He'd been doing his job, plain and simple. The judge maintained his calm demeanour, explaining that Moss was there to answer specific allegations about how he performed that job and that he needed to show the court respect it deserved. Moss shifted his weight, jaw tight, and said he'd spent 18 years giving the city respect while others just complained. The edge in his voice was unmistakable. The clerk began reading the complaint. The complainant was Marcus Thompson, age 28, a middle school teacher with no prior criminal record. On the evening of September 15th, Mr. Thompson had been sitting in his personal vehicle in his own driveway when Officer Moss approached without cause and demanded identification. When Mr. Thompson questioned the reason for the stop, Officer Moss became verbally aggressive and physically forceful. Body camera evidence showed excessive force was used, and Mr. Thompson was arrested on false charges of resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. He spent the night in jail before all charges were dropped. Mr. Thompson was filing a formal complaint for civil rights violations, excessive force, and falsification of police records. As the complaint was read, Officer Moss rolled his eyes repeatedly. He muttered just loud enough to be heard, saying, "Here we go with this again." When the clerk mentioned body camera evidence, Moss shook his head dismissively and pulled out his phone. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the courtroom, telling him to put the phone away immediately. This was a courtroom, not a waiting room. Moss looked up with visible irritation, but slowly pocketed the device, his expression making it clear he felt this was beneath him. I've seen this kind of arrogance before, and it always follows the same pattern. Someone who's been unchecked for too long starts to believe the rules don't apply to them, but courtrooms have a way of levelling that field. The judge leaned forward and asked how Moss responded to accusations of racial profiling and excessive force against a citizen who was on his own property, breaking no laws. Moss's response came quick and defensive. Racial profiling was the go-to excuse these days, wasn't it? He treated the man exactly how anyone in that situation would be treated. If people in certain communities would just comply with law enforcement instead of questioning everything, they wouldn't have these problems. The way he emphasized certain communities sent a visible chill through the gallery. Several people shifted in their seats. Judge Caprio's expression hardened, though his voice remained controlled. Every citizen in this country had constitutional rights, regardless of their neighbourhood or the colour of their skin. When he stopped Mr. Thompson, Did he have probable cause? Moss's face flushed red. Maybe if the judge spent a day in his shoes instead of sitting up there in his comfortable robe, he'd understand what it was like out there on the streets. They dealt with real danger, real threats, while the judge sat there and played judge from his bench. The courtroom went completely silent. The bailiff stepped forward slightly, ready to intervene if necessary. Judge Caprio stood slowly, his face stern but completely controlled. Officer Moss would show respect for the court and for the office of judge. His badge did not give him the right to disrespect judicial proceedings or to speak that way. The judge suggested he think very carefully about his next words. Moss leaned back slightly, but the smirk didn't leave his face. With all due respect, and his tone made it clear there was no respect in those words at all, he was just saying what every officer was thinking. They were out there risking their lives while people sat in comfortable offices and criticised everything they did. A retired police officer in the fourth row removed his cap and placed it over his heart, shaking his head slowly. The judge sat back down with deliberate movements. The court had the utmost respect for law enforcement. Good officers who serve with integrity and honour were the backbone of communities. However, the badge was not a shield against accountability. It was a symbol of public trust. And when that trust was violated, there had to be consequences. They were going to proceed with the hearing, and Moss was going to remain silent unless directly asked a question. Before reviewing the evidence, the judge wanted to understand something. Moss had been an officer for 18 years. What made him want to become a police officer? The question caught Moss off guard. He shifted uncomfortably. His father was a cop, his grandfather too. It was family tradition. The judge nodded thoughtfully. So he came from a family of service. That was admirable. Did his father teach him that some citizens deserve less respect than others based on where they lived or what they looked like? The question landed hard. Moss's face reddened. Of course not. Then where did he learn it? The courtroom fell silent, every eye on Officer Moss, waiting for an answer that didn't come. What should we expect from someone who wears a badge? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this question matters more than we think. Judge Caprio gestured to the clerk. They would look at Officer Moss's record. Documents appeared showing that over the past 18 years, Officer Moss had received 27 citizen complaints. Of those 27, 19 involved allegations of racial profiling. 8 involved excessive force. 3 resulted in internal investigations, all of which cleared Officer Moss with minimal documentation. The judge read from one file. In 2019, Hassan al-Rashid, an Iraqi immigrant and small business owner, filed a complaint stating that Officer Moss told him to go back to his country during a routine traffic stop. The complaint was dismissed as unsubstantiated, despite a witness statement from Mr. al-Rashid's teenage son, who was in the vehicle. The pattern continued. In 2021, Maria Rodriguez, a nurse at Providence General Hospital, filed a complaint after Officer Moss pulled her over and repeatedly asked about her immigration status, despite her showing a Rhode Island driver's license. According to her statement, Officer Moss said, "Illegals think they have rights." Miss Rodriguez was a third-generation Rhode Island resident. Her complaint was filed, but no disciplinary action was taken. Moss interrupted, his voice rising, saying those complaints were just people trying to get out of tickets, that everyone played the race card these days. Judge Caprio's expression hardened. Officer Moss had been warned to remain silent. This was his final warning. One more outburst and he would be held in contempt. In 2023, David Chen, a college student at Brown University, filed a complaint stating that Officer Moss stopped him while he was walking home from the library at night. According to the complaint, Officer Moss asked him what he was doing in this neighbourhood and searched him without probable cause. Mr. Chen's statement said Officer Moss told him, "People like you don't belong in neighbourhoods like this." The complaint was dismissed after a brief review. A pattern was emerging. Every single one of these complaints involved a person of colour. Every single one described language suggesting Moss viewed certain citizens as less deserving of respect and constitutional protections. And every single one was dismissed or minimised by his department. A woman in the gallery stood up suddenly and asked if she could speak. Judge Caprio looked at her with curiosity. She identified herself as Sarah Chen, David's mother. She'd been in court the day her son's complaint was heard. The officer who reviewed it told her that her son should be grateful Officer Moss didn't arrest him for suspicious behaviour. Her son was walking home from studying for his engineering exams. He had his student ID, his library books, everything. But because he was Asian and it was late at night, he was treated like a criminal. Her voice broke. He was so scared that night. He called her crying, asking what he did wrong, and the answer was nothing. He did nothing wrong except be the wrong colour in Officer Moss's eyes. Sometimes the hardest part about studying these cases is realising how many people suffer in silence before anyone listens. Mrs. Chen's courage to speak changed the entire tone of that courtroom. Judge Caprio thanked Mrs. Chen and turned back to Officer Moss. Did he have anything to say to Mrs. Chen or to any of the people he treated this way? Moss remained silent, but his breathing had become heavier. The confident swagger from his entrance had completely evaporated. The judge let the silence stretch out, giving Moss every opportunity to show remorse, to acknowledge his wrongs, to demonstrate any hint of integrity. But Moss said nothing. He just stared at the table in front of him. Judge Caprio announced they would now watch the body camera evidence from the night Moss arrested Marcus Thompson. He wanted Moss to watch carefully because the evidence told a story that contradicted nearly everything in his official report. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the timestamp appeared, September 15th, 10:47 p.m. The evidence was clear and the audio was crisp. The video began with Officer Moss's patrol car pulling up to a residential driveway. A man sat in a Honda Accord, the glow of his phone visible through the windshield. He wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything suspicious, just sitting in a parked car. Officer Moss's voice came through loud and aggressive from the very first word. "Get out of the vehicle now!" The man in the car, Marcus Thompson, looked up startled. His window was already down. He asked if there was a problem, explaining he lived there. Moss's hand moved to his weapon, resting on the holster. He said he didn't care where the man lived. He called him boy and demanded he get out of the vehicle. The word echoed through the courtroom. Several people gasped audibly. Marcus complied slowly, keeping his hands visible. He stepped out carefully, clearly afraid. He asked what this was about, what the reason for the stop was. Moss moved closer, his body language aggressive. He said Marcus fit a description and told him not to get smart. Marcus's voice remained calm despite his obvious fear. A description of what? He was a teacher. He'd just gotten home from a parent-teacher conference. He had his school ID if needed. Moss cut him off, demanding to see identification right now. Marcus reached slowly toward his back pocket, narrating his movements. But as soon as Marcus's hand reached his pocket, Moss grabbed him roughly and slammed him against the car. The sound made people in the courtroom flinch. The evidence captured everything. Moss searched Marcus aggressively, saying you people always have something to hide. Marcus's voice was strained, pained. The officer was hurting him. This was wrong. He hadn't done anything. Moss's response was cold. What was wrong was Marcus not showing respect. He should be grateful Moss was giving him a chance to cooperate instead of just arresting him right now. Another patrol car pulled up and a second officer approached, asking what was going on. Moss barely looked at his colleague, saying it was just another one playing victim, that they always had some excuse. Marcus's wife appeared in the doorway of the house, her voice carrying across the driveway. That was her husband. They lived there. She held up her phone showing their wedding photo and a picture of their house number. "Officer, please, you're making a mistake." Moss barely glanced at her, telling her to step back or she'd be arrested for interfering. Marcus tried to turn his head toward his wife, telling her it was okay to go inside and call his principal. Moss forced Marcus's face back against the car, saying he wasn't giving orders, that Moss was, and that Marcus was under arrest for resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. The video continued, showing Moss forcing Marcus to the ground, his knee pressing into Marcus's back as he applied handcuffs with excessive force. Marcus's voice was strained, struggling to breathe. He wasn't resisting anything. There was no reason to arrest him. He hadn't broken any laws. Please, he couldn't breathe properly. Moss's response was chilling. If he could talk, he could breathe. Stop being dramatic. This was what happened when people didn't respect authority. Marcus's wife was crying, filming from the doorway. Please don't hurt him. They had a daughter watching from the window, but Moss ignored her completely, hauling Marcus up and walking him toward the patrol car. The last thing the evidence captured was Marcus being placed in the back seat, his face pressed against the window and a small face visible in an upstairs window. A child, watching her father being taken away in handcuffs. The courtroom lights came back up and the silence was deafening. Judge Caprio's voice broke the silence, quiet but filled with restrained anger. Did Officer Moss dispute that the evidence accurately represented what happened that night? Moss's voice came out barely above a whisper. The video didn't show everything. It didn't show the full context. The judge leaned forward. The full context was that a man was sitting in his own car, in his own driveway, breaking no laws. The full context was that Moss approached him with aggression, used racial slurs, ignored his constitutional rights, assaulted him, and arrested him on false charges. What context was he missing? Moss had no answer. Judge Caprio asked Marcus Thompson to approach the stand. He wanted to hear directly from him about the impact of that night. Marcus stood slowly, his wife squeezing his hand before letting go. He walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity and took the oath. His eyes briefly met Officer Moss's, and Moss looked away first, unable to hold the gaze. Marcus explained he was a middle school social studies teacher at Hope Valley Middle School. He'd been teaching for 6 years. On September 15th, he'd just finished parent-teacher conferences. It was late, almost 11 at night, and he was exhausted. When he pulled into his driveway, he sat in his car for a few minutes, checking messages from parents. That was all he was doing, just sitting in his own car, in his own driveway, in front of his own house. Then he saw the patrol car pull up. At first he thought maybe there was an emergency nearby, but then Officer Moss approached his car and immediately started yelling at him to get out. He was confused. He asked what the problem was, and Moss called him boy. Marcus paused. He was 28 years old. He had a master's degree in education. He'd never been arrested, never been in trouble with the law. But in that moment, he became something else in Moss's eyes. He wasn't Marcus Thompson, teacher and father and husband. He was just a black man in a car, and that was enough to make him suspicious. When he tried to explain that he lived there, Moss didn't care. When he asked why he was being stopped, Moss wouldn't answer. He just kept getting more aggressive, more threatening. When Marcus reached for his wallet to show his ID, Moss slammed him against his own car so hard he had bruises on his ribs for 2 weeks. Moss searched him like he was a criminal, saying things about you people and how they always had something to hide. Then he arrested him for resisting arrest. Even though Marcus never resisted anything, he complied with every order. He kept his hands visible. He stayed calm. He did everything you're supposed to do. And it didn't matter. Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but his voice didn't break. He spent that night in a jail cell. He had to call in sick the next day because he couldn't face his students. He had to explain to his principal why their 8th grade social studies teacher, the one who taught them about civil rights and the Constitution and equal justice under law, was arrested in his own driveway for doing nothing wrong. Some parents pulled their kids from his class. They said if he was arrested, he must have done something, even after all charges were dropped. His reputation in his community was damaged because Officer Moss decided he was guilty of being black in his own driveway. But the worst part, Marcus said, the absolute worst part, was his daughter. She was 10 years old. Her name was Amara, and she was the light of his life. She was watching from her bedroom window that night. She saw that officer slam him against the car. She saw him put her father in handcuffs. She saw him take her daddy away. And now, months later, she still had nightmares. She was terrified of police officers. When she saw a patrol car, she grabbed his hand and asked if they were going to take him away again. He taught his students that police officers were here to help, that they protected communities, that they should trust them. But how did he teach his own daughter that when her first real experience with police was watching one hurt her father for no reason? Marcus looked directly at Officer Moss. His daughter asked him what he did wrong, and the hardest thing he ever had to say was, "Nothing, baby. I did nothing wrong. Because how do you explain to a 10-year-old child that sometimes people will treat you differently, will see you as dangerous, will violate your rights just because of the colour of your skin? How do you tell your child that the system that's supposed to protect everyone doesn't always protect people who look like us? His voice finally broke. She was 10 years old and she was already learning lessons about racism and injustice that no child should have to learn. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Several people were crying openly. A woman in the back stood and began to applaud, and others joined her. Judge Caprio allowed it for a moment, then gently called for order. He thanked Marcus for his courage. His testimony was powerful and important. He turned to Officer Moss. Moss had heard the testimony. He'd seen the evidence. He'd heard about his pattern of complaints. Did he have anything to say? Any acknowledgement of the harm he'd caused? Any remorse? Officer Moss sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough. He was just doing his job. No apology, no remorse, just the same tired excuse. Judge Caprio stood, and the entire courtroom rose with him. He looked at Officer Moss for a long moment before speaking. He'd been a judge for over 30 years. In that time, he'd seen thousands of cases and thousands of people stand where Moss was standing. He'd seen good officers, dedicated officers, officers who understood that the badge they wore was not a symbol of power, but a symbol of service and sacrifice. Moss was not one of those officers. The judge's words were measured but devastating. Moss had systematically abused his authority. He'd violated the constitutional rights of citizens based on nothing more than the colour of their skin. He'd brought dishonour to his uniform and shame to the thousands of good officers who served with integrity every single day. But what disturbed the judge most was Moss's complete and utter lack of remorse. Even now, after watching himself on video, after hearing Mr. Thompson's testimony about how he traumatised his child, after seeing the pattern of complaints spanning nearly 2 decades, Moss sat there and said he was just doing his job. What Moss did was not his job. His job was to serve and protect all citizens. His job was to uphold the Constitution, which guaranteed equal protection under the law, regardless of race, religion, or background. His job was to be a guardian of the community, not a threat to it. He failed at every aspect of that job, not because he made a mistake in a moment of stress, but because he held beliefs that were fundamentally incompatible with the oath he swore to uphold. The judge continued. Moss said he didn't understand what it was like on the streets. He was right. Judge Caprio didn't wear a badge. He didn't face the dangers that officers faced every day. But he understood something Moss seemed to have forgotten. Every person who came before that court, every person Moss encountered on those streets was someone's father, someone's son, someone's husband. They were teachers like Mr. Thompson, who shaped young minds. They were nurses like Maria Rodriguez, who saved lives. They were students like David Chen, working toward their dreams. They were immigrants like Hassan al-Rashid, building businesses and contributing to the community. They were human beings, deserving of dignity and respect. And Moss's badge did not give him the right to treat them as anything less. Judge Caprio issued his ruling. First, he was forwarding this case to the District Attorney's Office with a recommendation for criminal charges including civil rights violations, assault under colour of authority and falsification of official documents. Second, he was sending a formal recommendation to the Police Commissioner that Moss be immediately suspended without pay pending a full internal affairs investigation and consideration of termination. Third, Moss was ordered to pay Marcus Thompson $5,000 in compensatory damages. Fourth, he would complete 100 hours of community service in the neighbourhood where he arrested Mr. Thompson, not wearing his uniform, serving as a civilian. Fifth, he would undergo a comprehensive psychological evaluation and complete bias training. And sixth, the judge was holding him in contempt of court for his repeated disrespect and inflammatory remarks. That was an additional $1,000 fine and 48 hours in county jail to begin immediately. Officer Moss finally reacted, his voice desperate. He had a family. He had bills. He couldn't lose his job. Judge Caprio's response was swift and firm. Mr. Thompson had a family too. He had bills to pay when Moss put him in jail for a crime he didn't commit. He had a daughter who needed her father when Moss traumatized her. Moss showed no concern for his family when he abused his authority. He didn't get to ask for mercy he never showed others. Justice in this courtroom was truly colourblind, but it was not blind to character. The judge had weighed Moss's character, examined his actions, and reviewed his pattern of behaviour spanning 18 years. He had been found wanting. He had every opportunity to show humility, to acknowledge his mistakes, to demonstrate even a shred of integrity. Instead, he doubled down on his arrogance and his prejudice. The badge was a privilege, not a right, and he had proven beyond any doubt that he was unworthy of that privilege. The bailiff approached. Officer Moss slowly removed his badge from his uniform and placed it on the table in front of him. His hands shook slightly. The swagger and arrogance that characterized his entrance were completely gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man finally confronting the consequences of his actions. The bailiff led him away, and the courtroom watched in silence, witnessing not celebration, but the somber recognition that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe accountability should apply to everyone equally, subscribe to Frederick Explains Court and share this story with someone who needs to see it. Judge Caprio addressed the courtroom one final time. Let this case be a reminder that no one, regardless of their position or authority, was above the law. The badge was meant to protect, not to harm. It was meant to serve, not to oppress. And when those who wore it forgot that fundamental truth, there had to be accountability. To the officers there who served with honour, thank you for your service and your integrity. Do not let the actions of officers like Derek Moss diminish the nobility of your profession. And to anyone who had suffered injustice, know that your voice mattered, your dignity mattered, and that courtroom would always be a place where truth was heard and justice was served. Marcus Thompson stood and approached the bench. He thanked the judge for seeing his humanity, for holding Moss accountable, and for giving him the chance to tell his daughter that the system, when it worked the way it should, did protect everyone. Judge Caprio responded with deep respect. Marcus showed remarkable courage. The judge hoped this verdict helped his daughter begin to heal and helped restore her faith that justice existed for everyone. Marcus walked back to his wife and they embraced, tears flowing freely. Around them, the courtroom erupted in sustained applause, not for vengeance, but for accountability, not for punishment, but for justice finally served. This story reminds us that accountability reaches everyone, that no badge places anyone above the law, and that real justice requires the courage to hold everyone to the same standard of decency and humanity. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of the uniform they wear or the colour of their skin, is held to the same standard of respect and humanity that we all deserve.